In early 2011, Nokia did something that only wounded empires do. It said the quiet part out loud. Stephen Elop, the company's new chief executive, sent out what became known as the Burning Platform Memo. And in a few stark pages, he reframed Nokia's situation as something more dangerous than competition. It was not just that the company was falling behind. It was that the ground beneath it had already caught fire. That was the shock of it. Nokia was still vast, still global, still everywhere in the literal sense that mattered to the old mobile world. Its phones were in pockets across continents. Its supply chain was legendary. Its relationships with carriers were deep. For years, the company had been the definition of mobile scale. But the memo made clear that scale alone was no longer a strategy. The market had moved, and Nokia had not moved with it. By then, the smartphone era was no longer arriving. It was already here, and it was already rearranging the industry around software app ecosystems and operating systems that could pull users into a larger digital life. Apple had shown what a tightly controlled Phone Plus platform could become. Android was spreading fast through the rest of the market, giving manufacturers a new competitive center of gravity. The old contest was no longer about who could build the best handset shell, or ship the most units, or work the most efficiently with carriers. The new contest was about who could build the most compelling ecosystem around the device. That was the battlefield Nokia walked onto in 2011, and it was not built for that kind of war. The company's own 2011 annual report lays out the scale of the decision that followed. Nokia adopted and licensed Windows Phone as its primary smartphone platform, began transitioning away from Symbian, and launched the first Lumia devices later that year. It was a dramatic pivot, but it was also an admission. Symbian, the operating system that had once powered Nokia's smartphone ambitions, was weakening faster than the company expected. MeeGo, the other in-house hope, was not ready to fill the gap. Nokia was trying to cross from one platform to another, while the ground was still moving under its feet. That is what makes this moment feel less like a product launch and more like a boardroom emergency. The company was not choosing from a position of comfort. It was choosing under pressure, while trying to preserve some value from a platform that was visibly declining. The annual report reflects that tension plainly. Nokia knew the transition would be difficult, and it knew the market was changing quickly enough to accelerate Symbian's fall. In other words, the company was trying to manage a retreat and a reinvention at the same time. And while Nokia was making that leap, its rivals were not waiting for the landing. Apple's iPhone had already transformed the premium end of the market into a showcase for integrated hardware and software. Android was scaling across manufacturers and price points, turning the smartphone into a broad ecosystem fight instead of a single company contest. By the time Nokia centered its future on Windows Phone, the industry was already consolidating around two dominant gravitational forces. The company was not entering a blank field. It was entering a race that had effectively started without it. That is why the Burning Platform memo mattered so much. It did not cause Nokia's problems, but it gave them language. It told the world that the old model was failing, and it signaled that the company's leadership understood the severity of the threat. Yet the memo also revealed something deeper. Nokia's crisis was no longer just about phones. It was about whether a hardware giant built for one era could remake itself fast enough for another. That question would come to define the rest of the story, because Nokia did not lose simply because it missed one trend or backed the wrong handset. It lost because the smartphone revolution changed the rules of power. The advantage shifted from manufacturing strength to software momentum, from distribution muscle to developer ecosystems, from the ability to sell a device to the ability to support a platform that people would want to live inside. Nokia was still enormous when the shift began, but enormous was no longer the same as dominant. By 2012, the consequences were already visible. Symbian sales were falling harder and faster than expected, while Lumia was only beginning to find its footing. The transition was not delivering a clean handoff from old to new. It was producing a gap, and in a fast-moving market, gaps are dangerous. They give customers a reason to look elsewhere. They give competitors time to fill the space. They turn a strategic reset into a visible collapse. And that is the central mystery at the heart of Nokia's fall. How does the world's phone giant become the cautionary tale? How does a company that once seemed to define mobile communication end up needing to explain, almost publicly and in real time, why its old strengths were no longer enough? To answer that, you have to go back before the crisis memo, before Windows Phone, before the burning platform. You have to return to the era when Nokia did understand the old war better than anyone else, and when its dominance seemed not just impressive, but almost unshakable. That was the world it mastered, and that was the world that would disappear beneath it. Before Nokia became a cautionary tale, it was the company that seemed to have solved mobile phones. Not perfectly, not forever, but so thoroughly that for years the global market appeared to bend around its strengths. Nokia did not merely make phones. It understood the old rules of the business better than almost anyone else. Build at scale, ship reliably, keep costs under control, win the trust of carriers, and put millions of identical devices into the hands of people who wanted something simple, durable, and affordable. In the era before smartphones rewrote the meaning of a phone, that was enough to make a giant. What Nokia mastered was the industrial logic of the feature phone age. A mobile phone was above all a piece of hardware. It had to work on networks across countries, survive rough use, meet the demands of operators, and arrive in massive volumes at the right price. Nokia excelled at all of that. Its manufacturing reach was enormous. Its distribution was global. Its brand was instantly recognizable from Helsinki to Hong Kong to small towns where a phone was not a luxury object but a practical tool. That mattered because the old market rewarded companies that could deliver reliability at scale more than companies that could tell the best software story. Nokia also built something that was easy to underestimate: trust. Carriers and retailers wanted partners who could deliver devices consistently and support them across regions and price tiers. Nokia became the kind of supplier that could serve the high end and the low end, the urban market and the emerging market, the first phone buyer and the upgrade buyer. It was not just selling a handset. It was supplying an ecosystem of logistics, relationships, and expectations. If a device could be produced in volume, distributed efficiently, and sold with a strong brand behind it, Nokia could often dominate the shelf before a rival had fully entered the room. That reach was especially powerful in emerging markets, where the first wave of mobile adoption was driven less by apps or operating systems than by access, price, and dependability. In those markets, a phone had to be good enough, sturdy enough, and cheap enough. Nokia's portfolio was built for that world. It could offer a basic model to one customer and a more advanced handset to another without changing the underlying logic of the business. The company was exceptionally good at serving a mass market that cared about calling, texting, battery life, and durability. In that environment, elegance in software was less important than the ability to move units. This was the old operating system of the industry, and Nokia was a master of it. Hardware margins mattered, manufacturing excellence mattered, incremental improvements mattered, a better keypad, a brighter screen, A slimmer body, a more attractive design, a longer battery life, a slightly improved camera. Those were the kinds of advantages that could make a model succeed. The company knew how to iterate, how to refresh, how to keep the product cycle moving. It knew how to compete in a world where the phone was a finished object, sold mostly on the basis of what it could do out of the box. That is what made Nokia look so durable. It was not a one-product miracle. It was a system, a company with global scale, deep supply chains, strong carrier relationships, and a brand associated with reliability could keep winning year after year because the market itself reinforced those advantages. When the rules are stable, the player who understands those rules best can seem invincible. Nokia's success was so broad that it could feel like destiny. But it was really disciplined execution, repeated over and over, until it became the company's identity. Yet success of that kind creates its own blindness. When a business is built to win the old war, every strength begins to look universal. The company learns to measure progress by the things that once mattered most: volume, manufacturing efficiency, broad distribution, and the ability to make a phone for every price point. That mindset is powerful in one era and dangerous in the next. It teaches managers to ask how many units they can ship, not whether the market's definition of value is changing beneath them. It trains an empire to optimize for the battlefield it already knows. Nokia's problem was not that these strengths were fake. They were real, and for a long time they were decisive. The problem was that they were tied to an older version of mobile computing, one where the phone was still primarily a device, not yet a platform. In that older world, software was important, but it lived inside the device. It supported the hardware. It did not yet define the whole business. Nokia had built itself for a market where the best phone was the one that sold, worked, and disappeared into daily life. That success made the coming transition harder to see. A company that has spent years winning one kind of competition can assume that the next version of the competition will still reward the same instincts. It can keep believing that scale alone will protect it, that distribution will always matter, that carriers will remain the gatekeepers, that consumers will continue to choose phones the way they always have. But markets do not always announce their rewrites in advance. Sometimes the old system keeps paying out right up until the moment it doesn't. So Nokia entered the smartphone era carrying extraordinary advantages from the past. Those advantages were the reason it had become the world's most formidable mobile phone maker. But they were also the reason the company would struggle to recognize how much had changed. It had learned to win a war of hardware, logistics, and reach. The next war would be about software, ecosystems, and the power of the platform. And by the time Nokia fully understood that the battlefield had shifted, the new order was already taking shape around it. The old logic of the mobile phone market began to break apart in front of Nokia's eyes. For years, a great handset maker could win by mastering the physical object itself, the shape of the keypad, the quality of the battery, the radio performance, the durability of the shell, the efficiency of manufacturing, and the strength of carrier relationships. But the smartphone changed the center of gravity. The phone was no longer just a finished product to be bought once and used until the next upgrade. It was becoming a platform, a gateway to software, services, and an expanding universe of applications that would determine whether the device felt alive or obsolete. Apple understood this shift early. The iPhone did not merely offer a different design, it offered a different idea of what a phone was supposed to do. It made the screen central, reduced the importance of the keypad, and turned the experience of touching, swiping, and downloading into the heart of the product. Around it grew a new kind of loyalty, one built not only on industrial design, but on the sense that the device could keep getting better after purchase. Android pushed the same transformation in another direction, spreading rapidly across many manufacturers and price points. Together, iPhone and Android began to define the new smartphone era, and they did it by building ecosystems that drew users in and kept developers invested. That ecosystem effect mattered more than Nokia's old strengths had prepared it for. In the feature phone era, distribution and scale could decide everything. In the smartphone era, the decisive question became whether the platform could attract developers, services, and momentum. A phone without the right apps could feel incomplete, no matter how well it was built. A phone with the right apps could become indispensable, even if its hardware was ordinary. The battle was no longer just about selling devices. It was about creating a place where users wanted to stay and developers wanted to build. Once that kind of network effect took hold, the market began to reward platforms that kept improving through software rather than hardware alone. This is where Nokia's problem became structural. Symbian had once been an asset, but in the new environment it started to look like a burden. It had been shaped in a different era, for a different set of expectations, and as smartphones moved toward touch interfaces and richer application ecosystems, the platform's complexity made it harder to adapt. Developers who wanted to build for the new market increasingly looked elsewhere. They wanted simpler tools, cleaner interfaces, and bigger audiences. They wanted a platform that made software feel like the main event. Symbian, for all its history and reach, began to feel like a system from the previous age trying to survive in a world that had already moved on. Nokia still had enormous scale, immense brand recognition, and a global distribution machine few competitors could match. But those advantages were not enough when the value of the phone was being redefined from the inside out. The company could ship millions of devices and still fail to create the kind of pull that made a platform resilient. It could build strong hardware and still lose the larger war because the software experience lagged behind. That was the deeper problem. Nokia was not just up against better phones. It was up against better ecosystems, and ecosystems do not yield easily to hardware alone. The result was that Nokia's lineup began to suffer from a mismatch between what it was best at and what the market now demanded. Consumers were no longer comparing phones only by battery life or build quality. They were comparing them by what they could do, what they could download, what services they could access, and how seamlessly the whole experience fit together. The smartphone era made the operating system visible in a way it had never been before. That meant the weaknesses of a platform could no longer hide behind a good case or a strong retail presence. Every delay in software, every friction in development, every awkward user experience was now exposed to millions of customers who had alternatives. So Nokia's struggle was not that it had missed one fashionable product trend. It was that the rules of the game had changed underneath it. The company had been built to dominate a market where excellence in hardware and distribution could carry the day. But the smartphone market increasingly belonged to companies that could orchestrate hardware, software, services, and developers as one system. Once that shift became clear, Nokia's position looked far more vulnerable than its shipping volumes suggested. The company still had reach, but reach was no longer enough. It still had engineering talent, but engineering alone could not solve a platform problem. And as the rest of the industry accelerated toward app-driven smartphones, Nokia was left trying to protect a legacy platform that had begun to outlive the world that created it. By the time Nokia's leadership began speaking openly about crisis, the problem was already baked into the company's software stack. Symbian had once been the engine of Nokia's smartphone dominance. It was the platform behind a long era in which the company could turn out capable, widely distributed devices and still believe that scale, reliability, and brand would carry the day. But the smartphone market had changed faster than Symbian could. What had once looked like a stable foundation now looked increasingly like an inheritance Nokia could not easily modernize. That was the central trap. Nokia still depended on Symbian to keep its smartphone business alive, even as it knew Symbian was no longer the future. The company was trying to do two contradictory things at once. It needed Symbian to keep selling phones, keep carriers engaged, and keep revenue flowing. At the same time, it needed to move away from Symbian quickly enough to build something modern before the market moved on completely. That kind of transition is difficult in the best of circumstances. For Nokia, it became a race against the company's own clock. By 2010 and 2011, the gap was visible. Symbian had been patched, reworked, and extended, but it was no longer the kind of software platform that could easily meet the expectations of the new smartphone era. Consumers now expected fluid interfaces, rich app ecosystems, and rapid software evolution. Developers expected simpler tools and clearer incentives. Competitors were delivering platforms that felt designed for this world from the start. Nokia, meanwhile, was carrying the weight of an older architecture and a massive installed base that could not simply be abandoned overnight. The result was a long, awkward middle ground. Nokia could not fully commit to the past, but it also could not yet rely on the future. Every quarter spent propping up Symbian was a quarter not spent fully scaling its replacement. Every engineering team assigned to support legacy products was a team not available to build the next generation. Every product decision had to account for the fact that Nokia was still selling into the old market while trying to survive in the new one. The company was effectively running two smartphone strategies at the same time, and neither had the clean focus it needed. MeeGo was supposed to solve that problem. In theory, it represented Nokia's chance to leap over the limitations of Symbian and build a modern platform with more ambition than maintenance. It was the long-term bet, the fresh start, the system that could have given Nokia a more credible future in the platform era. But MeeGo was not ready when Nokia needed it to be ready. It remained promising in concept and unfinished in execution, a platform that suggested what Nokia might become without yet proving it could get there at scale. That made MeeGo less of a rescue and more of a waiting room. A company under pressure does not get unlimited time to wait for its next platform to mature. The smartphone market was moving too quickly, and each delay made Nokia's position harder to defend. The longer MeeGo remained incomplete, the more Nokia had to keep investing in the very software it wanted to leave behind. It was trying to build tomorrow while still depending on yesterday to pay the bills. The Nokia N9 became the emblem of that unrealized future. It was admired for what it showed: a more coherent design, a more modern feel, and a glimpse of how Nokia might have reimagined itself if its software transition had come together differently. But admiration is not the same as a turnaround. The N9 arrived too late to reset the company's trajectory. It could symbolize possibility, but it could not reverse years of structural delay. By the time the device appeared, Nokia's problem was no longer whether it could make an interesting phone. The problem was whether it could still build a platform that mattered. Inside the company, the consequences of that split were severe. Attention was divided, resources were stretched, engineers were asked to support old products while helping invent new ones. management had to decide where to place bets without knowing which line of development would pay off soon enough. That kind of organizational strain does not always show up in one dramatic failure. More often, it appears as friction everywhere, slower decisions, muddled priorities, products that arrive without enough momentum, and teams that work hard without ever quite pulling in the same direction. Nokia's challenge was not simply technical, it was organizational and strategic. A company built for hardware excellence had to rewire itself around software, but the old business still generated enough importance that it could not be shut down cleanly. So the old platform lingered, the new platform lagged, and the transition between them became the most dangerous place Nokia could stand. Symbian was no longer strong enough to win the future, but MeeGo was not ready to replace it. That left the company exposed in both directions. And the market did not pause to help. While Nokia tried to keep its legacy smartphone business from collapsing, Apple and Android were accelerating. They were not merely selling phones. They were setting the terms of the new ecosystem competition. In that environment, weakness in software was not a temporary handicap. It was a compounding liability. Every delay made the company look less like a leader and more like a defender of a fading system. This is why Nokia's collapse cannot be understood as a single missed product or a single bad year. The deeper story is that its software transition arrived too late, moved too slowly, and demanded too much from a company already under siege. Symbian had run out of road. MeeGo had not reached the point where it could carry the company forward, and in the space between those two realities, Nokia began to lose the one thing a platform company cannot afford to lose: time. By early 2011, the logic of a radical pivot was becoming impossible to ignore. Nokia still had a global footprint, a famous brand, and enormous experience. But its internal software path was now a liability as much as an asset. The company had spent years trying to extend the life of an old system while preparing the next one, and that in-between state had become untenable. The next decision would not just be about product design. It would be about choosing which future, if any, Nokia could still reach. By early 2011, Nokia no longer had the luxury of waiting for its own slow-moving future to arrive. The company still sold more phones than anyone else in the world, but the ground beneath the business had changed. The handset market was no longer just about manufacturing strength, carrier relationships, and the ability to put a reliable device in millions of hands. It was becoming a contest over software, services, and the gravity of entire ecosystems. Apple had shown what that meant. Google had shown how fast it could spread. And Nokia, still burdened by the limits of Symbian and the delays of MeeGo, needed a way to jump across the gap before it disappeared into it. The answer it chose was Microsoft. In February 2011, Stephen Elop's now famous Burning Platform memo made the crisis feel existential, and in the weeks that followed, Nokia moved toward a partnership that would redefine the company's future. In April, Nokia formalized the deal with Microsoft and adopted Windows Phone as its primary smartphone platform. That decision was not merely a product swap. It was a declaration that Nokia would stop trying to build a modern smartphone operating system from scratch and instead borrow one from a partner with deeper software ambitions and a direct stake in challenging Apple and Android. On paper, the logic had a certain appeal. Nokia had hardware scale, industrial design talent, distribution reach, and a brand still recognized across the globe. Microsoft had the software platform, developer tools, and the ambition to create a third smartphone ecosystem. Together, they could try to become more than the sum of their weaknesses. Nokia would bring the phones. Microsoft would bring the operating system. Each side had something the other needed, and both were under pressure to prove they still mattered in a market that was moving quickly without them. Nokia also had reasons to believe that Windows Phone could offer something Android could not. Android was already spreading fast, but precisely because it was spreading so fast, it risked becoming a crowded field where hardware makers fought over thin margins and little identity. For Nokia, which had spent decades building its reputation on distinct products and tightly managed quality, that was an uncomfortable future. The company's public rationale for not choosing Android was rooted in differentiation and scale. It wanted a platform where it could stand out, not simply become one more manufacturer in a sea of look-alike devices. Windows Phone seemed, at least in theory, like a place where Nokia could matter more. But the very reasons the deal seemed strategically attractive also revealed how dangerous it was. By choosing Windows Phone, Nokia was tying its smartphone future to a platform it did not control. That meant dependence on Microsoft's roadmap, Microsoft's engineering priorities, Microsoft's developer ecosystem, and Microsoft's ability to persuade consumers and carriers that the platform had a real future. Nokia could shape the hardware, influence the product experience, and help market the devices, but it could not make Windows Phone succeed on its own. It had traded the burden of building an operating system for the risk of betting its future on someone else's. And there was another problem: time. Nokia's own annual report made clear that this was not a clean handoff. The company was still trying to preserve the economics of Symbian while moving users, developers, and carriers towards something new. It warned that the transition could be difficult and that changing market conditions had already caused Symbian to decline faster than expected. In other words, Nokia was not switching platforms in a calm market with room to maneuver. It was trying to change engines while the aircraft was already losing altitude. The company understood that the move could weaken Symbian's economic viability before Windows Phone had enough scale to replace it. That was the core gamble. Nokia needed a bridge, but it chose a bridge that might not reach the other side. The first Lumia devices arrived in late 2011, giving Nokia a fresh design language and a new story to tell. They were important symbols. They showed that Nokia was not retreating from smartphones, and they gave the company something more modern than the aging Symbian portfolio it was trying to leave behind. But symbols are not the same as momentum. A new product line can generate excitement. It cannot instantly reconstruct an ecosystem. Developers have to build for it. Consumers have to trust it. Carriers have to support it. App availability, user familiarity, and market confidence all have to build together, and none of that happens overnight. That is what made the Windows Phone bet so perilous. Nokia was not just launching a new phone family. It was asking the market to believe in a future that had not yet proven itself. At the same time, the older business was already losing strength. Symbian was weakening faster than Nokia had hoped, and every sale lost to the transition reduced the resources available to support the next one. The company was effectively compressing two difficult tasks into one. It had to keep the legacy business alive long enough to fund the shift, while also convincing the market that the replacement was worth waiting for. This was not a decision made in a vacuum, and it was not the product of one memo alone. The crisis inside Nokia had been building for years. Symbian's limits were real. MeeGo was not ready. The smartphone market was already consolidating around two dominant ecosystems. The Microsoft alliance was an attempt to escape that bind, not a cause of it, but the choice of escape route mattered enormously. By moving toward Windows Phone, Nokia narrowed its options just as the market was narrowing around it. There is a cruel logic to desperate strategic bets. The more urgent the problem, the more appealing a shortcut becomes. Nokia needed speed, scale, and relevance. Microsoft offered a path to all three, or at least the promise of them. The danger was that the promise came with trade-offs that Nokia could not fully control. If the platform failed to gain traction, Nokia would have sacrificed precious time and burned through the middle ground it had once occupied. If it did gain traction, the company might still find itself dependent on a partner whose priorities were never exactly its own. For a company that had once defined the mobile phone age, this was an unfamiliar kind of vulnerability. Nokia was still huge, still global, still capable, but it was no longer steering its future alone. It had chosen alliance over autonomy, speed over control, and a third-party ecosystem over a homegrown one. The bet was rational enough to be tempting and risky enough to be dangerous. And once the first Lumia phones were out in the world, Nokia would have to live with the consequences of that choice, while its old platform kept slipping away beneath it. The hardest part of Nokia's reset was not announcing a new direction. It was surviving the space between the old world and the new one. By early 2011, Nokia had already admitted to itself that Symbian could not carry the company forward. Stephen Elop's burning platform memo, leaked in February, gave that crisis a memorable shape. The old system was not just aging, it was becoming dangerous to stand on. But a diagnosis is not a cure. Once Nokia formally aligned with Microsoft in April 2011, the company set in motion a transition that had a brutal internal logic. Symbian would be phased down. Windows Phone would become the primary smartphone platform. The trouble was that the old engine was still responsible for most of the company's volume, while the new engine was nowhere near ready to replace it. That created the kind of gap that destroys momentum. Nokia could not simply keep pouring energy into Symbian as if nothing had changed, because every month invested in the old platform made the pivot harder. Yet it also could not afford to abandon Symbian instantly, because Lumia had not yet earned the trust of consumers, carriers, or app developers at the scale Nokia needed. So the company found itself trying to do two contradictory things at once: support a platform it no longer believed in, and accelerate a platform that had not yet proven it could stand on its own. In theory, that sounds like a managed transition. In practice, it was a slow-motion squeeze. The annual report for 2011 makes clear that Nokia expected the transition to be difficult, but even it appears to have underestimated how fast the old business would deteriorate. Symbian demand fell more sharply than Nokia had planned. That mattered because platform transitions are not just technical migrations, they are confidence games. Once the market sees that a platform's future is being withdrawn, every participant starts to behave differently. Consumers hesitate to buy into a dead end. Developers hesitate to build for a shrinking base. Carriers hesitate to promote devices that may soon be replaced. And once those doubts take hold, the decline can become self-reinforcing. That is what made Nokia's position so fragile. It was not enough for Lumia to exist. Lumia had to arrive fast enough, in sufficient quantity, and with enough differentiation to compensate for the volume falling away from Symbian. But in the months after the Microsoft announcement, that rescue had not yet happened. The first Lumia phones did not reach the market until late 2011, and even then they were only beginning to establish a foothold. Public reporting in early 2012 described a company whose Symbian sales were falling harder and faster than expected, while the new line was still too small to absorb the shock. Nokia was not just transitioning, it was shrinking while trying to transition. That shrinking had consequences inside the business. Revenue pressure turned into losses. Losses turned into restructuring. Restructuring turned into more uncertainty. And uncertainty is poisonous in a platform war, because platforms are built on the promise of continuity. If you are a developer, you want to know that the phone you build for today will still matter tomorrow. If you are a carrier, you want to know that the vendor can support the roadmap long enough to justify shelf space and marketing. If you are a customer, you want reassurance that your purchase is not being orphaned by a corporate strategy meeting somewhere far away. Nokia could not give the market those kinds of guarantees with the same confidence it once had. This is why the transition was so damaging even before anyone could say whether Windows Phone itself was good or bad. The issue was not simply product quality, it was timing. A smartphone platform lives or dies on a network effect. Software attracts users, users attract developers, developers attract better software, and that ecosystem deepens the platform's value. But Nokia entered the Windows Phone era, just as that logic was hardening around other ecosystems. The company had chosen a path that required patience, yet patience was exactly what the market was withdrawing. Inside Nokia, the hope was that the new alliance would create a clean break, a credible modern software platform, fresh hardware identity, and enough brand strength to persuade buyers that a new chapter had begun. But a clean break is a luxury few legacy giants get. Nokia still had factories, channels, contracts, and millions of customers anchored to the old system. It also had the burden of explaining why the platform that had once defined its identity was now being managed toward extinction. That made every decision feel double-edged. Move too slowly, and the old business decays in public. Move too quickly, and the company risks cutting away the base that is still paying the bills. And while Nokia wrestled with that dilemma, the outside world did not pause for sympathy. The market did not wait for Lumia to mature. It did not wait for Symbian to fade gracefully. It did not wait for the software strategy to settle into something coherent. The transition itself became part of the decline, because every month Nokia spent crossing the gap was another month in which rivals were strengthening their positions and the center of gravity in smartphones was shifting elsewhere. By the time Nokia had begun to find its footing with Windows Phone, the ground beneath the industry had already moved. So the tragedy of this chapter is not that Nokia made one dramatic mistake and never recovered. It is that the company made a rational move to escape a failing platform, and the very act of escape accelerated the fall. Symbian weakened faster than expected. Lumia arrived too late to replace the lost volume. The ecosystem around Nokia's future remained too thin to generate momentum on its own. And the company that had once dominated by moving phones at scale suddenly found itself trapped between two worlds, unable to live fully in either one. What comes next is bigger than Nokia's internal pain, because once the transition started to break momentum, the rest of the industry was free to do what fast-moving markets always do: reward the platforms that were already accumulating users, developers, and confidence, and leave the rest to explain why they were still trying to catch up. While Nokia was still trying to steady itself, the smartphone market was already moving on. That is the cruel part of platform wars. They do not pause for a company's internal reorganization. They reward momentum, and then they amplify it. The moment users, developers, and carriers begin to believe that a few ecosystems are the future, every decision starts to flow in the same direction. More apps, more devices, more marketing, more retail shelf space, more consumer confidence. In smartphones, success does not sit still, it compounds. By 2011, that compounding effect had become impossible to ignore. Android and the iPhone were no longer just popular products. They were becoming the default centers of gravity for the entire industry. Consumers were learning where the best apps lived. Developers were learning where the largest audiences were. Carriers were learning which phones customers asked for by name. And once those three groups start converging, the market stops being a race among equal contenders and starts becoming a funnel. That was the real problem for Nokia. It was not simply that the company had fallen behind on one device or one feature. It was that its rivals had already created ecosystems strong enough to pull everyone else into their orbit. A smartphone was no longer judged only by its hardware. It was judged by the life surrounding it, the software catalog, the services, the upgrade path, the ease of finding accessories, the confidence that the platform would still matter 2 years later. Apple had locked in one side of that equation with iOS. Google had locked in the other with Android. Together, they were teaching the market to think in ecosystems rather than handsets. Nokia, by contrast, was trying to build a new future while defending the old one. Its leadership had declared Windows Phone the primary smartphone platform, but Windows Phone was still a small third ecosystem. That mattered because ecosystems are not merely collections of products. They are networks of incentives. Developers go where the users are. Users go where the apps are. Carriers back what they believe will sell. And a platform that starts small has to overcome a vicious asymmetry. It needs partners before it can attract customers, and it needs customers before it can attract partners. Nokia did not have the luxury of a clean start. It was carrying the burden of a legacy platform, the uncertainty of a transition, and the pressure of an impatient market all at once. Symbian was still generating revenue, but its decline was accelerating faster than Nokia had hoped. The company was trying to keep the old business alive long enough to finance the new one, even as the old business was losing relevance in real time. That meant every quarter carried a double message. Nokia had to reassure investors that it still had a profitable base, while also persuading the world that its future lay elsewhere. In a fast-moving market, that is an almost impossible story to sell. And the market was not waiting for reassurance. As Nokia's share softened, confidence softened with it. That was not just a statistical problem. It was a psychological one. Once a platform appears to be losing, people begin to act as if the loss is already complete. Developers hesitate before committing resources. Carriers hesitate before giving a device premium placement. Consumers hesitate before buying into what might become yesterday's system. The decline becomes self-reinforcing because every retreat by the market makes the next retreat easier. Falling share is not only the result of weakness, it can become the mechanism that creates more weakness. This is why the smartphone war was never just about specs. It was about belief. A platform with momentum makes people feel safe betting on the future. A platform without momentum makes them feel they may be investing in a dead end. Nokia's challenge was that by the time it had committed to a new course, the center of belief had already begun to settle elsewhere. iPhone had become the prestige choice. Android had become the broad, flexible alternative. Between them, they were shaping the way the entire category was understood. Windows Phone, meanwhile, was still asking the world to take a chance on its promise. For Nokia, that meant the reset was happening inside an ecosystem race that had already started to narrow. The company was not entering a neutral field. It was entering a market in which attention had already been claimed, and where every new handset had to fight not only for sales, but for relevance. The more the market consolidated around Apple and Android, the harder it became for Nokia to argue that it could return to the center. The company could still make good phones, it could still command respect. But respect is not the same thing as gravity. That is the quiet trap of these transitions. A company can be working desperately, can be making painful strategic sacrifices, can be reorganizing around a new platform, and still find that the market has moved faster than its rescue plan. Once that happens, every improvement arrives late. Every launch has to climb uphill. Every success is measured against rivals whose ecosystems are already larger, stickier, and more familiar. The platform with momentum gets more momentum, and the platform trying to catch up must fight against time itself. Nokia's story in these years is the story of a company trying to outrun a market that no longer needed permission to choose its winners. By the time the Lumia line began carving out a foothold, the broader contest was already tilting toward a duopoly of iOS and Android, with Windows Phone still struggling to become something bigger than an alternative. That left Nokia in the worst possible position. Not quite dead, but no longer able to shape the terrain on which the future would be decided. And once a company loses that power, the remaining options grow narrower by the month. The next stage was not about proving that Nokia could still make devices. It was about deciding what was left to save. By September 2013, the story had reached its final turn. Microsoft agreed to buy Nokia's handset business, a deal that did not merely mark the end of a partnership gone wrong. It marked the end of Nokia as an independent force in the phone business it had once ruled. The company that had defined mobile handsets for an entire era was no longer trying to outmaneuver the market on its own terms. It was being absorbed into someone else's plan. That outcome did not arrive out of nowhere. It was the last step in the arc Nokia had set in motion when it chose Windows Phone as its primary smartphone platform. In 2011, the company had already admitted that Symbian was being transitioned away and that the move would be painful. The burning platform memo had framed the crisis in dramatic terms, but the deeper problem was more structural than rhetorical. Nokia had spent years trying to defend a phone model built around hardware excellence, carrier relationships, and manufacturing scale at exactly the moment the industry was being reorganized around software, applications, and ecosystem loyalty. The company still knew how to build devices. What it could not easily recreate was the gravitational pull that came from a platform people wanted to live inside. The Windows Phone decision was meant to be the escape route. Instead, it became the narrow bridge that led to the sale. Nokia had hoped that aligning with Microsoft would give it a differentiating platform and enough momentum to re-enter the smartphone race. But by the time Lumia devices began to appear, the market had already hardened around iOS and Android. Consumers were choosing not just phones, but stores, services, messaging systems, app libraries, and social habits. Developers were following the same logic. And once those networks started to reinforce themselves, late movers faced a cruel math problem. Even a strong product could arrive too weakly connected. That is what made Nokia's decline so difficult to reverse. The company was not destroyed by a single bad device or one unlucky year. It was trapped in transition. Symbian was losing relevance faster than Nokia could economically replace it. MeeGo was not ready to save the company. Windows Phone offered a strategic reset, but the reset happened inside a market that was already consolidating around rivals with more momentum and more software gravity. Nokia was trying to turn while the road was already narrowing. By the time the turn was complete, the lane it had chosen no longer looked wide enough. When Microsoft stepped in, the logic was clear enough from the outside. For Microsoft, Nokia's handset business offered hardware expertise, global reach, and a chance to give Windows Phone a dedicated champion. For Nokia, The deal ended a costly struggle to keep the handset business competitive in a market that no longer rewarded the strengths that had made the company great. It was not simply a rescue. It was an admission that the center of power in mobile had moved. The device maker was no longer the master of the market. The platform was. That is the larger lesson hidden inside Nokia's fall. Hardware leadership can win a market when the market is still defined by engineering, scale, and distribution. But once software ecosystems define the terms of competition, hardware becomes only one part of a much larger equation. A company can still be admired, still be innovative, still build excellent products, and still lose its commanding position if it arrives late to the platform shift and cannot move fast enough to change the rules. Nokia's mistake was not that it failed to make good phones. It was that it entered the smartphone era as a champion of the old order, and then tried to cross into the new one after the ground had already changed. And even now, the counterfactual remains tempting. What if Nokia had chosen Android? What if it had moved earlier? What if it had embraced software more aggressively before the market locked in? Those questions will always linger because they point to real forks in the road. But the fuller answer is less tidy and more revealing. Nokia's fate was shaped not by one decision alone, but by the combination of strategic delay, execution gaps, and an industry transformation that rewarded ecosystems over empires. By the time the handset business was sold, the war had already been decided by forces larger than any single company's control. So the ending is not just that Nokia lost. It is that the company that once stood at the center of mobile was finally folded into the logic of the winner's world. The handset empire did not vanish in a single moment. It was gradually dismantled by timing, by software, and by the market's relentless preference for the platforms that made everything else possible. And that leaves behind the final question. Not whether Nokia could still build phones, but whether any hardware giant can survive once the battlefield stops rewarding hardware alone.